Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of Sefer Eov, the book of Job. We are about to read Perek Lamed Beis, that is chapter 32. We have just completed the dialogue between Eov's three friends and Eov. We got the sense that Eov's third friend so far didn't even bother to give a response in the last round, and his second friend only gave a few verse reply. So the friends gave up. Eov just gave a long speech in which he asserted his innocence. He asked God for an opportunity to defend himself. Asked God, I'd be happy to defend myself, and you'll see that I don't deserve this punishment. And that was it. Eov had no more to say. So we've been following this, and if we had to sum up the disagreement between Eov's friends and Eov in just a few short sentences, the way we would describe it is that the friends said that Eov, you must have been guilty because God is just. He wouldn't punish someone who's innocent. So if you're getting punished, you must be guilty. So repent for your sins and pray to God, ask for forgiveness, and that's how you can turn things around. Eov, on the other hand, as we know, the reader knows because we heard from God himself in the beginning of the book, I am innocent, and therefore this punishment, I don't deserve this punishment, and I want to challenge, and I'm asking God, why are you making me suffer even though I don't deserve it? And if you remember, Eov asked for chachma, for understanding of what this is. In chapter 32, we are introduced to another figure, another person named Elihu, and we'll read about him in a moment. And Elihu is going to chime in, and he's going to give a speech for several chapters, to which Eov does not respond while he gives his speech. And Elihu is coming to add something, to add a dimension, to bring up the level of discussion at least a notch, to get closer towards the answer to theodicy, the answer to the question of why someone like Eov, why a righteous person like Eov could suffer the way he's suffering, and how Eov should look at it. So in 32, Elihu is introducing himself, humbly introducing himself. So he's not going to go into the depth of his answer in this chapter, but let's read about this person and see what we can find out about him, and we'll begin to hear what he has to say. So Vayishbesu sheloshes ha'anashim ha'ela, this is verse 1. These three people completed me'anoses Eov from replying to Eov. They were done replying kihu tzadik be'einav, because clearly in his eyes he was a tzaddik, and this is the way they looked at it. He is righteous in his own eyes. He's not going to admit that he must have faults. He's never going to repent for those faults, which these three friends were convinced he must have. So they had nothing else to say. In other words, once in their mind, justice was simple. And if he was getting punished, he must deserve it. And the only thing left is for him to admit it. And if he won't admit it, there's nothing left for them to say. However, in verse 2, Vayichar af Elihu ben Barachel. However, Elihu, the son of Barachel, Habuzi, who was who was a Buzite, exactly if that's a place name or if that's a family name, he was very angry at this point. In other words, he felt like the conversation got stuck on this disagreement between Eov and these friends, and neither of them took it farther, took it to the place where Elihu felt it should have been taken, the conversation. Now, it's clear these names, Elihu ben Barachel Habuzi, mimishpachat Ram, from the family of Ram, right? Who was very angry, this person, his names are clearly meant to sound like Israelite names, like Jewish names. Elihu is a name very similar to the name of Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet. It's also found in several places in that form, Elihu. It means he is my God. Ben Barachel, the one who's blessed by God. Habuzi, we know Buzi is the name of Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel's father. So these names are clearly Jewish sounding names. Whether or not this means And the other names, until now, they were clearly not Jewish sounding names, including the name of Eov himself, which is a non-Jewish name. So whether or not this is meant to be indicative of someone imparting the wisdom of Judaic beliefs, or Judaism teaches, it seems to be indicating something like that. The commentaries say a lot of things. I just wanted to point that out. I guess you can judge for yourself when we hear what Elihu has to say. So why was he angry at Eov? Eov chora apo al tzadko nafsho me Elohim. Now I'm going to read this carefully here, because there's a lot of different ways to read this, and commentaries have all different kinds of directions. I'm going to try, although I know it's really impossible to not insert my own thoughts and feelings into how I interpret the verses, but I'm going to try to do what I promised to do throughout this podcast, is let the prophets speak themselves. So he was angry at Eov, Eov chora apo, al tzadko nafsho, over what Eov did, which was he made himself righteous, me Elohim, more than God himself. In other words, what it sounds like is not so much, had Eov just been angry with God, right? But understood, though, right, that God is above him. In other words, I'm angry with God because of what he did. That would have been acceptable, right? And Eov approaching God and saying, why have you punished me even though I don't deserve it? That would also have been acceptable. But what Elihu was angry about was his perception, at least, that Eov was tzadko nafsho me Elohim, that he thought of himself as being more righteous than God. Now, this, whether or not this is true about Eov, is a matter of opinion, but clearly Elihu was angry at Eov because that is how he perceived Eov as speaking, in such a way that Eov was claiming that I know I don't deserve this because I know better, right, than God. If only I could talk to God, I would prove to him that I'm right and I don't deserve this punishment. This is what Elihu was angry with. In other words, what's really happening is Elihu is accusing Eov of having a very similar, if not the same, mistake as the three friends. The assumption that the justice that is meted out by God, or the universe that God created, is a type of justice that human beings will understand as justice, right? In other words, that just like the friends thought that justice means when a person does something bad, he gets punished by suffering. If a person does something good, he gets rewarded by some kind of a pleasurable reward, right? In other words, the kind of justice that you or I think about when we think about justice. And then when you apply that to this situation, Eov insisted, I therefore do not deserve this punishment because I am not guilty of anything, or certainly not guilty of anything that deserves this kind of justice. And then when you apply that logic, then Eov is considering himself higher than God in the sense of justice, because how, God, can you punish me if I don't deserve it? So this is how Elihu understood Eov, and this is why he was angry at him. In verse 3, he says, and he was angry at his three friends, al asher lo matzu ma'aneh, because they did not find anything to say, right? They could not find an answer. In other words, they went along with Eov in this idea, right? The same simple-minded idea of justice and what God's justice is, right? And therefore they couldn't answer Eov. The only thing they could keep on doing is by Arshiu at Eov, consistently making him out to be evil. In other words, he's angry at them because the only conclusion you can come up with is that Eov is a Rasha, that Eov is an evil person that has done evil things. Maybe there's another answer. Maybe Eov is not a Rasha. Maybe he's not a bad person, right? But there's still justice in what God does, or some other form of justice which is godly that you and I don't have capacity to necessarily understand. But let's see where Eov takes this. So Elihu chika et Eov bidvarim. The verses in verse 4 describes a little bit of what Elihu thought about, right? What he was doing this whole time. He was sitting there And he waited to hear all of the things that Eov would say, because with the hope, presumably, that Eov would eventually get to the right conclusions by himself. But why didn't he chime in when the friends did? Because they were much older than him, so he respected them and he didn't say his word. He waited until everyone else had said everything they had to say, then he chimed in. Vayar Elihu, and Elihu saw ki ein ma'aneh b'fi shloshes anoshim, that he saw that they have nothing to answer. They don't know how to answer Eov's words. Vayichar apo, and this is why he became angry. Vayan, this is verse 6 now. So this anger, to some extent, is not so much an anger, but it's like the youthful, when a young person, say, gets angry about like a political subject or something, they get very heated about it and they're screaming, whereas an older person who's been there, done that, seen this before, have been around the block a few times, they might get upset about something, but they don't get as worked up. And that's the image that's being portrayed here. Elihu getting all worked up, like a young man, right, would, over this issue, over what seems to be the lack of understanding on the part of both Eov and on the part of the three people, the three friends. So what did Elihu now have to say? So Elihu started by saying the following. And he starts in a very kind of respectful way, explaining why he should speak, why he has a right to speak at all, and that's what's going to be the theme of the rest of this chapter today. Vayan Elihu ben Barachel Habuzi, Elihu the son of Barachel the Buzite said as follows, and this was his monologue. Vayomar, and he said as follows: Tza'ir ani li yamim, I am a young man in days, Atem mishishim, and you guys are elderly. Alkein zachalti, this is why I was afraid, right? I was trembling in fear. And I was afraid to speak my own ideas, my own mind. I was afraid to speak my mind. Amarti, I said, Yamim didaberu. They're speaking on the basis of age, right? Let the age speak. In other words, let them who have the experience of time speak. Virov shanim, and the many years yodiu chachma, they will bring out wisdom. In other words, the fact that they're old will somehow bring out wisdom, somehow bring out something that I can't, or maybe I should just wait for them to say. Achein ruachi ve'enosh, right? However, it is the what is it that really gives wisdom? It is not days and time and experience, right? But rather it is the spirit that is in man, the nishmas shadai tviname. It is the literally, that means the soul of God. In other words, the breath of God within us that gives us understanding. Now, this is going to be the key to what Elihu is going to start talking about in the next chapter. He's dropping a little hint here. What he's saying here is that the intelligence and the spirit that we have that makes us human, that builds that relationship between a human being and God, that enables us to get a grasp of what God's justice is really like, right, is in our hearts and minds, so to speak. It is in the spirit within man, within which all of this plays out. So Elihu just brought it up a notch completely. It's not when we look at this world, you punch me, I punch you. You steal from me, I take from you. You did it, so on and so forth, back and forth. You do and then if you bring it up to a slightly higher level, you do a crime, you go to jail. You work hard, you get a paycheck. In the very simplistic world of action, right? That's not where man's communication with God is. And that's not where we come to an understanding and appreciation of God. And that's not where the action, this idea of justice plays out. It doesn't play out in the world of action. It plays out in the world of the mind and spirit. Lo rabim yachkamu, this is verse 9. There aren't that many people who attain this level of wisdom. Many people remain, right? Remember, Eov begged God, I want wisdom, right? But Eov never achieved that, or at least Elihu is stating that he never did, right? Many people, there aren't that many people that achieve this level of wisdom and understand. They still think of the world in this simplistic way, right? That you guys are stuck on. There aren't that many elder wise men who ever really truly understand justice, right? Right? Who understand what God's justice really is. L'chein amarti, this is why I said, Shim Ali, you need to listen to me, achaveh de'i af ani, right? I am also going to speak my mind. I am also going to say what my opinion is. Heino chalti l'divrechem. I have I have waited for all of your words to be complete. Azin adet tivunosechem. I listened carefully to all of your understandings and the way you understood and explained things. Ad tachkerun milin, and I waited until you were able to search out and investigate all sorts of things. So you guys investigated all this stuff and you said everything, and I waited and I listened, and I still didn't hear what I really needed to hear, what I really wanted to say. V'yadechem esbonan, and I thought about it. I took what you said seriously, right? Um, and as I was thinking about it, v'hinei behold, I noticed, I realized, ein le'Eov mochiach. No one is answering Eov. No one is answering his question, right? His question, which was, why am I suffering if I don't deserve it? And all you guys could answer is that you do deserve it, right? One amarov mikem, right? No one was answering his statements from you. None of you. There's three of you who are answering his statements. Pen tomru matzanu chachma el yidfenu lo ish. This verse here is really like this verse here, 13, pasuk Yud Gimel, is the Elihu paraphrasing what the conclusions are going to say, right? What your conclusions are. If you don't go the next step, right? I'm afraid that if I don't speak up, you guys are going to say, well, we've found wisdom, right? And God is going to be the one that's going to have to come down and explain it to Eov because he's not listening to us, right? And I don't want you guys to stay stuck on your infantile description and understanding of justice, right? Because your description of justice ends up making Eov into a Russia, making Eov into an evil person, like you described before, and he's not, right? Right? That's the only answer you have. So, and you guys are going to think, if I don't speak up, you're going to think that you've answered everything because Eov didn't listen and nobody answered. So, v'lo arach elai milin v'imrechem lo ashivanu. And this is important. And what he's laying out here is he's saying, Eov, did not place his words against me. Eov has so far not argued against me. He's only argued against you, right? The only argument you guys were able to place was that Eov was guilty, and Eov argued back, no, I'm not guilty, right? So, and that's where it ended, right? But he hasn't yet responded to what I have to say because I didn't speak yet. Lo ashivanu. And I am not going to answer Eov the same way that you did, right? Your answer, you kept on giving, in many, all kinds of flowery ways, but the bottom line is all of your things basically boil down to one thing. You're guilty, that's why you're suffering. But I'm not going to answer him like that. I'm going to answer him in a completely different way, not by telling him that he's guilty, but by telling him something else entirely, right? And what that is, we're going to learn as we hear the words of Elihu. Chatu lo anu od, right? Ha'tiku mehem milim. They have the words, right, that they have said, right? He's referring to they, meaning the three men. Until now he was referring to them as you. Now he's kind of looking up into the air and saying, these guys over here have nothing else to say. Ha'tiku mehem milim, right? The words have been taken away from them. In other words, they're completely dumbfounded without a single answer to give. I have waited until they stopped speaking, till they had nothing else to say. Ki amdu lo anu od, until because now it's finally the point where they've just stopped and they have nothing else to say. So now I am going to say what I have to say. I'm going to say my ideas. I'm going to say what my understanding explains to me. Because I am full of words. The spirit or the wind within my stomach is pushing. It's shoving me. It's pushing me into the corner, or trying to squeeze its way out. I feel the pressure of the ideas building up inside me. My stomach is full of something wise, something important to say, like a wine, and which has not a wine bottle which has not yet been opened. Imagine like a the pressure buildup in a carbonated wine, which is like about to explode. Like new barrels of wine that just burst open. Adabra b'yirvach li let me speak, and so that I could feel better. I need to speak because I'm getting a stomach ache. Let me open my mouth and reply what I feel about this issue. I'll know ish, right? And here in verse 21 and 22, which are the last two verses, in a little poetic jingle here, I'll know ish v'eladom lo echaneh, right? Which is, I would not uh, I'm not going to speak in such a way that I'm saying I'm a yes man, as often ish, trying to flatter somebody and say what he wants to say, who hear me say, right? I'm not going to bend to what people want me to say, what people want to hear. Kilo yodati achane kimat yisaeni oseni, because I don't know how to hold back my words. I don't know how to twist my words. I'm not a flatterer. I'm not going to say what everyone wants me to say. I'm going to say what's coming out, right? And kimat, it is as if Isaeni Oseni, it is as if he who made me, God Himself, is what's carrying me, what's pushing me to say these words. It's kind of what they call a chiastic structure here. Al not esofene ish is the first, and then it ends with kimat Isaeni Oseni. I won't flatter a man because it is God, right? And then the second and part of the first phrase and the first part of the second phrase, El Adam lo achaneh, I am not going to bow to any human, ki lo yadati achaneh, because I do not know how to bow. The structure and the rhythm comes out in the Hebrew. It's hard to translate it into English or any other language for that matter. So this lays out Elihu's introduction. He's about to speak. He's asked permission to speak, and now we should be on the edges of our seat. Okay, well, what is he going to say? To what level is he going to bring this? And like I told you before, when we read verse 8, it is the spirit within man, right? It is his relationship. It is the nishmas shaddai to be named. It is the relationship. It is with God. It is the soul of God, or the breath of God that's blown within him. That is where one gets understanding from, not from looking at the world around us, the world of action and reaction. So that gives us a little bit of a hint as to where Elihu is going to take this, and where Elihu is going to take his response to the question of theodicy. And that we will study together in chapter 33. Have a wonderful day.